Hello, good afternoon. This is Sarah Barksdale recording for my final project for implementing digital curation in the workplace. So, by way of introduction, I work as a historian for the Air Force at Joint Base Andrews, Maryland, and the field historians, which are the historians attached to military units. They collect material from each component of the unit throughout the year to compile an annual history. It means that our responsibilities include collection, organization, and management of the documentation. And even though requests to actually use our material from other researchers are pretty infrequent, our office uses the material that we collect and that other historians have collected pretty much every day to answer research questions from throughout the unit. In addition, we provide public historian services. We work to instill a sense of history in our airmen for a better understanding of the present organization, operations, and the installation, and also instill unit pride and morale. So as for the project that I worked on this semester, I think that the digital curation and computational thinking are going to support a lot of different projects and initiatives in our office. But one of the requirements that the Air Force field historians need to fulfill is to create and maintain an organizational heritage pamphlet. And that basically details the history and lineage of your unit. Now, the standard for this documentation has generally been to produce a long paper ranging from 25 to 100 pages, PDF it, and then post it on the organizational website. And I will bring up an example of that. You can see it just kind of details the history and lineage and honors of any given unit. But basically, what we wanted to do was to take this product and modernize it, make it a little bit more compelling, connect it a little bit better to some of the other resources that people who might be looking for information about the unit might be searching for as well. Anything from, the Family Support Center to what other wings are on base. So the new products are not just going to tell the story of our organization, which is the 316th Wing, but it's the installation host wing, so it supports all of the other units that reside on this base. And we want to be able to provide material to tell the larger story of Joint Base Andrews using narrative, multimedia, and maps and other items that users can really interact with a little bit better. In terms of our process, or my process, so for a federal history office in Department of Defense, the process was a little bit time consuming because of the difficulty of purchasing and acquiring and getting software installed on your network. And in a lot of cases, I had to find some workarounds for some of the software that wasn't currently improved on my installations network, like Abby Fine Reader's current version, for instance, because getting software approved through the base is almost impossible. For instance, I put in a request for the current version of Abby back in January, and it hasn't even been touched. But the plan to acquire the software that we wanted, uh, and then acquire a standalone laptop that wasn't connected to the network to use some of the non-approved software on as a workaround, that we would rewrite the pamphlet and some of our other public-facing material, and then we would also work to use computational tools to scan some of our historical documentation and then transform the data so that we can use it a little bit more efficiently and be able to extract data, um, anything from aircraft types to units, dates, personnel numbers, distinguished visitors on the base, that sort of thing, and make our responses to requests for information from throughout the unit a lot more efficient. And then the last part, using computational tools was a little bit more experimental. So for today, what I've drafted is mainly a public-facing product that we're going to continue working on the data extraction aspect. The other complicated part of the data extraction aspect is for some of our histories and documents that we keep in our repository. They have different types of classification markings, and even just unclassified or CUI information we generally have to be a little bit careful with. So longer term, we're probably going to have to work a little bit better with information protection and our security managers to determine if we're even allowed to scan those. As with any workplace, a lot of other priorities came out up throughout this semester. So for this project, I didn't end up actually completing a new draft of the organizational heritage pamphlet that details my unit's specific lineage and honors. So that's now one of my next steps because of time constraints and the amount of research required to do that. So instead, as we have several base tours for both of our airmen and a lot of different Air Force leaders that's going to be coming up later this month, works to take our base tour, which is completely just a bus tour at this point, and create more of a guided tour using ArcGIS's story maps. So it's our office's hope that in creating a more engaging product and experience and a way to connect with the history office that we'll be able to expand our reach a little bit better and just more generally generate more interest in how our products and materials can support the unit. So I'm going to share my screen again. So I finally obtained ArcGIS story maps almost a month ago, and fortunately, with their current platform, you're able to use it mainly online, which kind of was another nice workaround, so that I didn't even have to deal with IT for this. Um, but we reworked our base tour and did some additional research to procure historic photos that didn't have copyright restrictions and that sort of thing. So after redrafting the tour and the narrative and adding photos to that script, I ran it through my public affairs office to ensure that there weren't any red flags and it's good for release and publication. And it was just approved yesterday evening. So while I haven't published it yet, so you see it's still in draft form, it'll be good to get moving for next week. So I brought up a version of the ARC map tour that I did. Um, and I am using the mobile version, but I can also show how it looks as, a full screen version, which is a little bit prettier. But since this is a product that we envision having airmen who are going on our bus tour be able to kind of scan a QR code beforehand and then follow along and look at some historical photos as we go through the tour and through the base, I also like to generally check and see how it'll show up on a mobile device. So the first feature that I wanted to show was the then and now of the base. So you could see how it looked back in 1943 when it was first built. And although I'm not done with my georeferencing, I pulled in a lot of aerial imagery from the 1940s. What's on there now is from the 1960s, but I found it was kind of tricky orienting some of the stuff from the 1940s because there aren't a lot of the same reference points. The runways were in different positions, the landmarks were a little different. And you can see on my base map, I can show you the base map on ArcGIS Online. I did a rough georeference for some of this 1960s imagery. It doesn't use raster points the way that something like ArcGIS Pro would, but even though it's a little bit off in places, it's good enough for my purposes of a base tour. As I said, one of the things I find useful is testing the functionality and visibility on a mobile device throughout this process. And after inserting a map with a swipe feature, while it looked really cool on a computer, it actually crashed my cell phone browser every time. And I found out that some of the features just contain too much data for a cell phone or a mobile device, which makes sense because these maps were scanned in from the National Archives, really high resolution TIFF scans, and then georeferenced over the satellite imagery. So as a workaround, and I'm going to need to play with this a little bit more, I'm going to be substituting images of the maps and images of the overlaid historic imagery so that you still have the same sort of functionality. So they should be able to swipe to see the historic image and then the current image of the base. So that was the first feature. And then as we keep going into the tour stops, um, I ended up plotting all of the areas that we generally point out from the bus on the tour and speak about, and added our narratives and photos to allow our audience to see historical imagery of all of the stops on the tour and some current imagery as well. Uh, Another nice feature that I found we could do is we could, as I said, link to other resources. So for this one, there's a historic chapel on the base that this office did a tour of with one of the sort of innovation cells in the Air Force a couple of years ago. And so it's nice because this building, we point it out and we talk about the history of it, but it's generally locked and they don't actually get the chance to go into the building. So this gives them a chance to actually click and kind of see what it looks like inside. And then we wrapped up the tour and concluded it with a video, which, again, that's another feature I think I'm going to have to play around with for the mobile device, because while you can embed it for the version on a computer screen, you actually have to kind of click and then it'll take you to the link and you play it elsewhere. I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. So for the story maps, we have a couple of next steps. As I said, I have to complete the georeferences for the 1940s imagery over the base so the viewers can start out with that swipe feature to see the then and now. I need to finish editing our narrative and clean it up a little bit for upcoming tours, and then publish that guided tour in the next week here. And then we'll move on to other story maps. We are working on a history of the base rather than a tour. It's a little bit more comprehensive, a history of our wing for our organizational heritage pamphlet, and publish those as well. And our public affairs office will help circulate them. One thing I forgot to mention for um, the guided tour that I just showed was that we ended it with a call to action. So at the start of the tour, we'll brief newcomers on what our office can provide them, and we'll track requests for information and support that come through throughout the year to show the usefulness of the wing and office. So we provided all of our contact information at the end of that tour that you were able to scroll through, and also the services that we provide again. But I think those are all the next steps for the story maps. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the computational thinking, because that was a big part of this course as well, and give a quick summary of how we're going to use that computational thinking. And this part's really more experimental in nature. So I'm going to share a slideshow, hopefully. Okay, so sharing that slideshow. So to start off, I scanned one of our larger historical reference works that runs from about 1942 to 1989. Ran it through Abby Fine Reader. It's 400 to 500 pages, and it tells the history of the base. And there's a lot of detailed information, ranging from which airframes were on the base, which years, to which foreign dignitaries landed on the base. And I'd really like to be able to pull all of that information out for easy reference for us, but then also to potentially build out some public-facing history and have that data more easily at hand. What I'm still trying to figure out, because I also then ran it through OpenRefine to try and clean up the reference documents after we OCR'd it. I'm struggling a little bit with the GREL, the growl expression, to find data like airframes because it appears throughout the narratives as something like a C-47 or an A-1H or a UH-1N, and I can make the Boolean expression work to find hyphens in the narrative, as this presentation shows. But what I'm working out is still how to add like a regular expression to that hyphen to get 2 digits or 1 digit, like a letter like UH1N, and then be able to pull those airframes into a separate column. So that's a work in progress still, some of the computational thinking, experimentation, and thinking through what platforms might be best if I'm trying to extract something like names and years from the narrative somehow moving forward. So moving forward, I would like to continue experimenting with computational thinking, and it's something that I'd like our office to employ more regularly. We have a new overhead scanner on order, and once we get that, we'll initiate a scanning project for our historic newspaper collection, which goes from 1944 to 2014, though hopefully some of the more recent editions are already digitized. As we're planning for that digitization, as we're looking for interns and that sort of thing, I want to think about how can we employ that type of these types of tools to extract useful data from the historic newspapers as we go, to organize them, to make them more usable, accessible, to increase our efficiency as an office, because it's a resource that we use pretty frequently to answer requests for information as well. So overall, I would say that this final project is really just a first step as part of our efforts to modernize our outreach, modernize our deliverables, our organization, and the way that we manage the information in our office. So in the creation of some of the public or military-facing products like our story maps, the guided tours, those I think will help with our outreach efforts as we try to market our services and material more effectively to the unit. And internally, I think some of the software is already helping us. For instance, just a superior OCR scan with Abby FineReader has really dramatically increased the findability in reference documents. Over the past couple of weeks answering inquiries. It's just made it monumentally easier to find stuff in those documents. And once we clean the data, I hope that'll continue to improve even more. So I'll continue to work with some of those digital curation tools and hopefully get another chance to speak with Richard, as I'm sure that you have some of the answers to some of my challenges with the growl expressions. But overall, really enjoyed this instructional series. So I want to say thank you to the instructors. And that's all I have.